Hello and welcome to this week's Hippie Hyena. Now this week we're taking a look at Dinesh D'Souza, who's being interviewed by PragerU, which we've covered before. Let's not mess about and jump straight in.
Welcome to Office Hours. I'm Georgia Howe with the Daily Wire. Today we're sitting down with author, filmmaker, and podcaster Dinesh D'Souza.
Also, criminal. He's a criminal. He spent time in prison for election fraud, of all things. You know, the right wing, especially in America right now, is going bonkers over the phantom prospect of election fraud. Well, look no further. Here is a election fraudster, caught and convicted. In fact, he pled guilty, so he's an admitted convicted election fraudster. Funny how they left that one out. It's almost as if, they don't give a flying fidget about election fraudulence, unless it's imaginary. It's more the imaginary election fraud they don't like. The real stuff, they're seemingly happy with.
Dinesh's most recent PragerU video is titled, "What is Identity Socialism?"
Short answer, it's a figment of Dinesh D'Souza's fevered imagination.
And in the video, he discusses the new kind of socialist ideology we're seeing in America today, which is basically socialism based on identity characteristics rather than economic class. Sometimes you'll also hear this concept referred to as cultural Marxism.
Or cultural Bolshevism, which is a Nazi talking point that they've literally just changed the name from Bolshevism to Marxism and kept everything exactly the same. It's just a Nazi conspiracy theory. Basically, it's the idea that the Jews being angry with the white man for some reason is getting revenge by subverting culture in order to create miscegenation or something. It doesn't really make a lot of sense at all. From beginning to end, it's just gibberish.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here because the things that you're talking about in this video, I think, are kind of the main theme to American life right now.
So, ignoring the pandemic, which has cost a lot of lives, ignoring the record unemployment and the economy that's gone to absolute shit, ignoring the fact that black people being shot by white cops on record numbers, ignoring the fact that around 30% of the American population lives in a parallel world and is literally poised to commit acts of domestic terrorism against the US government. Ignoring all of those things, the most important thing is a made-up Nazi conspiracy theory that doesn't hold any water, has been debunked 1,000 times. That's the key thing about American life right now.
Yet, I feel like a lot of Americans don't understand what it is or why it's happening right now.
You know, if you think about socialism in the classic sense, when Marx talked about it, it was really a class division, an economic division between the rich and the poor, or really between the working class and the capitalist class. Marx thought that was the only division that mattered, and every other division kind of comes out of this fundamental one.
Now, I'm no expert on Marxist stuff, never read any of his books, and haven't studied it at all. But I'm pretty sure it's not about division, really. It's about equality, if anything. It's about trying to think of new ways, at the time new ways, to try and reorganize society so it's a little bit more fair and a little bit more enjoyable to live in than the sort of grueling grindstone of capitalism. Now, whether or not his ideas would fix what is wrong with capitalism is, I guess, up for debate and is a very complicated issue, but it's certainly not about division. That is not what Marx was about at all. I feel very confident in saying this.
But today in America, we have this hybrid type of socialism. It has a class component for sure, but even more important than class are the race category, the gender category, the transgender category. So if you go to a socialist conference these days, you'll find people who care a lot more about abortion than the minimum wage. They care more about the transgender athlete or the transgender bathroom than they do about universal basic income.
Are you sure about that? Are you sure? Because, I mean, sure, there are people who have, an intersectional approach, meaning that there's a whole bunch of issues that predominantly affect, say, trans people or black people or whatever other sort of group that has difficulty under capitalism. And sure, maybe you can find somebody who's got their own pet issue, but that sort of stuff, it overlaps with socialism, but it's not really like a new concept, you know? It's just that the thing is that people who are socialists tend to be more ethical, tend to have like a conscience or compassion to people who are in trouble. And so you'll find that amongst socialists, you'll find a lot of people who care about people having a difficult time. That's all it is, really. And the thing is, this sort of culture war stuff, it really tends to be a focus of the right more than the left. The right seem to be more fixated on these kind of more abstract kind of cultural issues, where the left tend to be fixated on things that are a bit more practical. Things like actually improving the lives of your average citizen in the country, in the world. Like the whole thing of Marx was like material analysis, an analysis of the material realities of a society in order to find a material fix for their problems. That tends to be the left's focus, whereas the right's focus is often on these kind of weird, abstract nonsenses, really. Imaginary concepts and stresses. I mean, look how freaked out they were by Mr. Potato Head. People on the left didn't give a flaming fidget about that. Nobody cared. We're not fixated on trans people in bathrooms. You guys are fixated on it. Weirdly fixated on it. Like recently, there was a law passed in, I'm not sure where it was, somewhere in America, probably in the deep south, that enables, I think, teachers to inspect the genitals of children to check that they're going into the right gendered bathrooms for their biological gender. Totally insane. Totally insane. That's just basically institutionalized, legitimized child abuse going on there. Just because you're so freaked out by somebody going to into a bathroom that you feel like you wish they weren't. I mean, it's just so weird. And yeah, when you do stuff like that, the left will push back on it. We'll push back on that craziness, you know? It's not that we're fixated on it at all. We don't want to be having to deal with these stupid cultural issues that really have been settled for like 50 years by anyone with a brain that works properly. And yet we're still having to debate stupid things like, should trans people, gay people have human rights? You know, we're still being forced to debate whether women should have the right to vote. No joke. You got people on your side of the aisle saying, well, maybe that was a mistake. You got people on your side of the aisle trying to stop black people from voting. You know, things that should have been settled a very long time ago, but we're still having to deal with this stupid idiocy instead of actually making a difference in people's lives, you know? And it's all because you're just trying to distract and mess about in order to protect the interests of the ruling class.
So you may recall over the past summer, there was that clip circulating of Patrisse Cullors. She's the leader of the BLM movement, and she was describing herself as a trained Marxist. Could you talk for a minute about the BLM movement and how that connects to cultural Marxism?
Well, you know, interestingly, if Marx were alive today, he would consider them to be complete fools, because Marx basically believed that the engine of society is the economic one, not the racial one. That was just not an important fundamental category for Marx. But I think what's happened today is that in America, the leftists have realized, listen, it's kind of difficult to stir up class grievances, because if you find some working class guy, he doesn't hate the capitalist system. He wants to be part of it. He doesn't hate his boss. He wants to become the boss. But on the other hand, there are legitimate and ancient veins of racial grievance.
Did you see what he did there? This is quite clever. This is quite a clever thing that the right wing often tends to do. He's created a kind of rhetorical trick where he's categorized two bodies of people, the working class and those affected by racial bias. But in reality, those aren't two categories. Black people can be working class too. But the way the right likes to classify the working class is a very specific group of white, right-wing and poor people. Put those together and that's what they think the working class is, and they exclude everyone else from the working class. But really, that's a kind of weirdly old-fashioned picture of the working class. The working class today is largely not white. Think of all the sort of immigrants who are like working as cleaners and sort of low-paid hospital staff and all of those kind of things. Why are those people not part of the working class? Why is it that people on the right like to exclude people of colour from the working class? Well, it's a kind of rhetorical trick, isn't it? It's a kind of trick so that they can delete the very real experiences and the very real voices of non-white working class people who are effectively at the bottom of the pile in our society, in the West all over. They're kind of like the working class of the working class.
So the left has realized, well, listen, what about if we kind of rub the sores of racial resentment? We can maybe make more headway.
Now, this is so offensive. Rub the sores of racial whatever? I mean, for God's sake, if you want to rub the sores of racial tension, the best way of doing it is letting white cops kill black people for no good reason, which happens way too much. And then you exacerbate that by having lots of, like, right-wing pundits talk about how that's fine and that's good that that happens. I mean, that's bound to rile anyone up. But they always try and frame it as if, like, the problem is the complaining about the problem, not the problem itself. They just want them to shut up and go away and tolerate the oppression they're suffering. They just want to avoid addressing the problem.
So understanding kind of how far this is infiltrated into our institutions, schools, government, that kind of thing, do you think there's any way to turn the tide at this point, or are we destined for a socialist revolution here in the US?
I'll take this question if you don't mind, Dinesh. The answer is yes, we're winning, and sooner or later, this system ain't gonna be around for much longer, you know? I mean, technology, as it develops, will not permit it to continue for much longer. Think of, like, you know, discussions around who gets a monopoly of the means of production. Or look at 3D printers, and imagine if 3D printers develop in the same way that, like, say, the video game has developed. That, like, in the 80s, video games were a bunch of blocks moving around on a screen, and now we've got, like, pretty detailed virtual reality that you can have in your own home in a very short period of time. Now, with 3D printers today, we're at the stage of a bunch of pixel blocks moving around on the screen, but I imagine in a very short period of time, 3D printers will be able to be printing the sort of goods that you can get anywhere and for cheap and very easily. In fact, most likely, they'll be free because there's no reason why you couldn't make 3D printers that process garbage and recycle it into 3D printed things. And sooner or later, we'll all have these in our homes, and we'll even have 3D printers that can print 3D printers. So 3D printers will become free. And how does, like, capitalism and the capitalist class maintain their grip on their monopoly on the means of production when that's happening? And then you take automation. Capitalism is inevitably going to automate everything it can because it's cheaper than employing workers. So eventually, there'll be no need for any workers. What happens then? What happens to all these people? Current system is just completely unable to cope with it. It has no solutions for this eventuality. The eventuality that it is running headlong into in a completely unstoppable way. All of these factors are impossible to stop, and all of them lead to the end of capitalism. Now, what it might be replaced with, as many people have pointed out, could be either socialism or barbarism. But I'd like to think that barbarism makes the world worse for everyone, so it probably won't win in the end, unless, of course, we're all wiped out by some kind of climate apocalypse before that happens. But the worldview and lifestyle that Dinesh D'Souza and his ilk are promoting and trying to protect is completely untenable. They're polishing brass on the Titanic, to quote Tyler Durden. The question is, will it be replaced with fascism or socialism? And I guess that's kind of up to us. It's kind of up to us, literally, because we're at the side that's winning so far. And on that note of optimism, look after yourselves and each other. Goodbye.